Morning.
Good morning. So we got Tom here, Morris, and Diana and Wayne are getting connected right now. Perfect.
Okay.
Diana, are you here?
Liz, I'm not quite ready.
Okay.
You see my mask?
Just don't spit on the screen.
Yeah, I know.
I just want to make sure I'm following the rules here.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I just want to make sure we got everybody on here, at least on audio. And then if you can see my screen, then I can share documents we're looking at and things like that as well. So Tom,
Can you see us?
I cannot see anybody right now. I can see Morris' picture. If you may have to connect your video for the call. There, now I
How
can.
about that?
Now I
Is
can
that
see.
better?
Yes, sir.
Well, then I got to put my mask back on.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Liz, I don't seem to be getting my picture up here.
And that's okay, Diana. If we can't see you, you just you know how to raise your hand on the participant screen, right?
You're asking for miracles.
No.
I just clicked the participants up there, right?
Yep. Click
Down at
participants,
the,
and then you'll be able to raise your hand if you need to.
Right, right. Hey, is my audio really bad? You want me to dial in instead of the internet audio?
If
I
we
can hear her fine.
yeah, we can hear you okay right now. We just
If you have a problem, I've got my phone here. I can dial.
okay.
Maybe.
Liz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ah, now I'm there.
There you are.
Okay.
All right. And Tom, are you there with us?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why my camera isn't working.
Okay.
I clicked on the little thing that looks like a little camera, and it took me to some place that I probably didn't want to go.
Okay.
But and I don't know how to get out of it.
Okay. We can hear you just fine, which is the important part here. So if you kind of run your mouse over the screen, you can see a little icon that says participants, and you can kind of manage or it may say manage. Mine says manage, but I'm leading the meeting. So if you click that,
Right.
pop up a little kind of side window. There's another one that's a chat that you can click up. So if anybody is having difficulty getting my attention in particular, you can go there and raise your hand and I should see it, or you can just chat at me and I can see the chat box. So those are just kind of some.
Well, that's kind of the problem. When I clicked on that thing, like I said, it just went someplace. I might have to quit Zoom and re-enter. And I think I'm going to do that.
Okay, why don't you do that before we get started? We'll wait a few minutes and make sure we get everybody connected. This is kind of
Okay, so I'm leaving the meeting, but I should be back
okay.
very
This
Liz,
is our
I
new,
don't see that. Oh, go ahead. I don't see that chat box you were talking about. You know, at the bottom, I see, I got the video and I got the, the other screen, but I don't see that chat or raise your hand participation, which you were talking about. Is that an icon or something?
there should be a little icon that looks like little people.
The only people I've got is on the invite.
Yeah.
Morris,
You don't have a little icon that says participants and it's got like two little shadows of people on it?
No.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So that's the participant screen. And
Mhm.
get that, if you
Okay.
click that, it'll pop up on the right. And you should
Right.
have,
At the bottom left, there's a little thing that looks like a camera, and there's a
Yeah.
red line through it. So I
I've
think
got that.
I'm
can you
gonna
click
on
that, Tom?
Hope for the best. There I am.
Hey, there you are.
Okay.
All right.
I'm so good with technology.
So before we get started, before I actually call the meeting to order, I will kind of, since this is some of y'all's first meeting on Zoom, you have to slow down the conversation a little bit when meeting time, and make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk, because if we all talk at once, it doesn't like that. So, you know, what we've kind of done in some other meetings is if you know, got something burning to say and you're not getting the chance, you can literally wave your hand, do something to get my attention, and I will certainly try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be heard through this. I don't see with our group that that's going to be an issue, but and then if you have technical difficulties, just let me know. We will figure it out. So with all that being said, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 9:06 a.m. And I'd sent out an agenda. There's not a whole lot on it, but did anybody have anything that needed to be added or changed on that agenda?
Just technically, we're supposed to approve prior meeting minutes.
Oh, yep. And I did miss adding that to the agenda. Yes, Diane.
Liz, did you fix that and call it the finance committee instead of the audit committee?
Yes, and I
Yeah.
just sent out the new ones a few minutes ago.
I move that we approve the minutes as presented by email.
Okay.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, our minutes are approved. Our agenda was, there was no issues there. So that gets us to our current business, of course, which is the investment policy. And Tom had emailed me lots of questions after working through it, which were great. And Morris had sent kind of a draft that moved some sections that he didn't really feel were as relevant to Hot Springs Village. And I didn't really throw any of that in here because I wanted the committee to have conversation about those, and all of us kind of come to agreement about what goes versus me making a decision on that, or you know, any one individual. So Tom, do you happen to have your questions and notes, and Morris, you kind of know what you were thinking through and thinking, or maybe explain what you were thinking. You were saying some of it seemed more like finance policies than investment. So.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, no, I don't have it printed out.
Okay.
B, I really don't remember what I wrote, but at the same time, I think if we just go through the draft,
Okay.
almost certainly whatever comments I'd made previously will come out. I mean,
Okay.
you know, writing from what I felt, so
Okay.
we should cover it, assuming that we're going to go through the policy as written
Yes.
and start commenting on it by section.
Yep. Diana.
I would like to say that for the purpose, I've made some edit changes so that we didn't have one long sentence. That little, I got this thing about run-on sentences, and so I did make some verbiage changes, which I think makes it read a little bit better. It's just some language housekeeping.
Okay. I tell you what I'm going to do, if this is okay with you guys, because I think, I mean, the best way to work on this is literally to work through it. Are you guys okay if I pull up the the document and edit as we go?
Yes.
Yeah. That's good.
All right, then I'm going to, and Tom, I do have your email printed here, so if we can, I can look back over it and make sure we covered all the points
Sure.
time we get through it or whatever, but I'm sure you're right there. All right, Diana, what did you have on that purpose then? And I will say, I did kind of reorganize just the headers and the pieces like that to match up to all of our other policies and the format that we've been kind of trying to get them as we redid them or as we revised them, trying to get that every policy has a purpose statement and every policy has some sort of delegation of authority that talks about where the authority comes from and then what governing documents it connects to or things like that. So that's what I did add to this.
Does everybody have a copy of this with them right now?
I can,
I just, that one list sent, yeah.
okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. I started out with the purpose to set policies, and I replaced to with which provide the necessary guidance for management, period. This policy strives to invest association funds in a manner which maximizes the safety and security of funds, comma, provides maximum return, comma, in preserving and protecting funds, comma, while meeting the daily cash flow demands, period. Policy will conform to all applicable federal, state, and or local statutes governing the investment of funds.
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
Well, when we state a maximum return, that's really hard to define. I don't know whether we want to try to have somebody maximize return, because what you can get today, tomorrow might be different. And so I think our key focus should be on security and safety of our funds, not trying to grasp the highest interest that we can achieve.
Would you think maybe we should change maximum to adequate?
Yeah, something a little bit less stringent, simply because now I'm going to have to focus on maximizing my return. And that kind of ties whoever's making the investment or in charge of the investment hand.
I don't mind maximum return, but I think it needs to be tied in better with the words that follow it, which I think is what it's intending there. It's providing maximum return maybe while preserving and protecting funds, because you're right.
Yeah, there we go. That works. Take out that
Primary
purpose. While.
Is that Morris? What's your thought there?
Personally, I like the purpose that you sent out here, Liz. To me, it's a little broader. I like, with all due respect to Diane there, with a lot of wordsmithing here, I actually like the purpose that you sent out here better than what we were just discussing. I mean, we can wordsmith a lot of words, but this is, you know, it's broad. Now, if we go down to defining maximum returns and all that kind of stuff, then we're going to have a section 10 or something, some kind of benchmarks and this type of thing that shows that we completed that purpose. And going back to Wayne's point, some of that gets pretty hard to quantify. I actually like the purpose the way it was written. I actually like it better than what I submitted to you. I hate to say that, but I do. I like the purpose the way it's written.
Okay.
Well, it's a run-on.
Unless Diane sees some violation or something in that purpose, but I like the way it reads. It's simple, it's broad, and we've got two objectives. I mean, in all of the investment things that I read, one is safety. That's number one, you know, and maximizing return or what is second. And you've covered all those points. I like it simple.
Yeah, and
The only thing that The only thing that I did, Morris, is I took one sentence and turned it into 3, so that it's not one run-on sentence. That's all I did. I got the same verbiage.
Yeah, I mean, I
That's not the way.
only changed a few words as she was talking there, and it really was creating a new sentence or putting a comma in and kind of separating some things. I do think,
Well, I have no problem with it. Okay.
Yeah. I think in line with what Wayne is saying, though, I do see a maximum return while preserving and protecting funds and meeting daily cash flow demands kind of puts the framework around, yes, we want to maximize our return, but only in the sense that preserving the funds and doing this stuff becomes before that, right? I mean, we can go invest to maximize returns, but that's not necessarily the primary purpose here. The primary purpose is to preserve and protect the funds.
True.
We can make some money on it, in the meantime, do it. Does that feel more comfortable to you, Wayne?
Well, I look at it that it's hard to quantify, and it could be subject to criticism, whoever's handling the investment, that they didn't maximize the return as well as they should have. And it kind of can be used against the person who's ever managing the portfolio. I'm talking about the CFO or treasurer at the POA, that somebody comes in later and says, well, you didn't maximize this return because you could have got a better return doing this and this and this. And I don't think we should focus on maximizing return. We should get a good return or something like that, but we shouldn't be striving secondary to try to grab the highest interest rate or the best investment.
Yeah.
And I'm just worried about the long-term effect on whoever's managing or in charge of this portfolio of being subject to criticism. Yeah. That's how I look at it.
Okay, so if we provide a return on investment, I mean, just simply change it to there's some sort of return.
Well, security of fund.
I mean, I'm looking at it from an employee. If I was managing the fund to maximize return, a whole bunch of people could be critical of that because I didn't quite get that extra basis point on that investment.
Right.
And then how do you quantify that you are looking at security and all that to tie that in? I'm looking at it so that if you, Liz, are doing that, somebody can't come back and say you did a poor job of this because you didn't maximize return, and we're going to reprimand you for it. That's how I look at it.
Morris, what were you
I tend to agree with that. Actually, security of funds and safety of funds and maximizing returns is an oxymoron. Really.
It is.
It is. If you want to go out and maximize return and take the number 5 high risk, I mean, you're not going to have safety of your funds, I think it should be clear though that we can have something on returns, but number one is it's got to be safety and security of funds. I mean, that's number one. And maybe we say, I don't know, effective return or something like that. But I agree with Wayne, not maximize funds.
Okay, so I just took that out and kind of took the descriptor off of the return altogether, the adjective removed. So this is how the purpose reads right now. To set policies which provide the necessary guidance for management. This policy strives to invest association funds in a manner which maximizes the safety and security of funds, provides a return on investment while preserving and protecting funds and meeting the daily cash flow demands. Policy will conform to all applicable state and our local statutes governing the investment of funds.
I like it.
I like that.
I like it.
Okay, Tom?
I'm fine.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna hit save. Make sure I don't these changes. All right, so then we get down to the delegation of authority, and I kind of started with wording from our bylaws, and then the bullet points came from that sample policy we were looking at, which then had a delegation of authority down at the bottom of it. And I think, Tom, you had questioned kind of this prudent person standard. Does this need to be in here, or is that just kind of implied? I will say the ethics and conflict of interest are in our bylaws, I mean, and are applicable to our corporate treasurer, you know, whoever that person is, which is where some of this authority delegates from. So I'm not sure it's necessary to be in there, just because it is already in some hierarchy governing documents. But what are y'all's thoughts?
I agree with that. I had actually on the draft that I had sent to you, I had taken it out also. But again, I guess it goes, who are we writing this policy for? I mean, is it going to, for the purpose of going to some investor? Or is it, you know, who is the primary user? Is it you guys, Liz, you know, the CFO or the CEO, or who's this document? So who's the primary user of this document we see? We talked about, you know, we want something that an investment banker could look at and say, you know, this is really investment language stuff. Well, you know, I think they know what a prudent investor is, or the prudent person. I have no problem with it being in there. I was just trying to keep it more simple, because that was one of the requirements that was in the guideline that we were looking at. It said a simple policy is better, but I have no objection with him leaving it in there if someone else sees a purpose for it.
Diana, what were your thoughts there? You had your hand up.
What I'm saying is that, you know, there will be an occasion when we will have to provide this investment policy to a broker, say.
Mm-hmm.
And having the ethics and conflict of interest in there goes along. I mean, that would also kind of be a red flag waving to them if they knew they were doing business with somebody that they were related to and they had a material interest in with them.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's a cross check, and it's almost a CYA thing.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, to leave ethics and conflicts of interest in there.
Well, and it's, I mean, it does have some good, I guess, say an internal control line to it that I do like, that says, you know, that if I'm the treasurer, that I can't use an investment broker firm that my personal funds are also invested in. And that isn't ever called out anywhere else. And I like control to sense. I mean, it protects the association from.
Well,
Well,
what
I
you're
like.
looking at.
I thought we were on the prudence. I don't have a problem with the ethical conflict of interest. I think that should be in there. I thought we were talking about this
Okay.
big statement on the prudent person.
Yeah. Okay. We can go back. We can do them one at a time. So then,
Okay, backing up to prudence,
mm-hmm.
just, I've got a little housekeeping there too, if you will. In the sentence where it says individuals acting in accordance with written procedures, I put a comma off after that and crossed out the and, because you're doing all those things. And then I end that with price changes. I put a period in there for price changes, after price changes. And then I added a sentence that this relief also requires, number one, that deviations from expectations are reported in a timely fashion. And number two, the liquidity / sale of securities are carried out in accordance with the terms of the policy. So I gave them like 2 bullet points there, so it highlighted them. But I mean, you can do whatever you want. That's no big deal. I just, I just like when something like that is written for it to say, here's the requirement, 1 and 2, and then the user of this document sees that requirement right there. It's not lost in a paragraph somewhere. It's minor stuff, but
Okay, so you're saying be relieved is the first bullet point?
I'm saying that, no, I'm saying you would have that sentence in there. Individuals acting in accordance with written procedures, comma, this investment policy and exercising due diligence shall be relieved of personal responsibility for an individual security risk or market price changes, period. Then this relief also requires, number 1, that deviations from expectations are reported in a timely fashion, and number 2, that the liquidity and the sale of securities are carried out in accordance with the terms of the policy.
Okay.
And I think probably want to change the word capital to principal, safety of principal.
I'm sorry, where was capital? Oh, okay.
It's a sentence.
Last
Considering the probable safety of their capital should be safety of their principal.
Okay.
That's usually what you're talking about when you're talking investments.
The last sentence in that section.
That was quoted though, and I'm not sure where it's quoted from.
Well, if you're going to, the prudent person standard, I don't know where you got the prudent person standard.
That came straight out of that other sample policy, so I'm not sure where they're referencing that. So let me.
Well, I don't think we want to quote something verbatim when we can't reference where the quote came from.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. Yeah, it's got a lot of definition, and I'm not sure where that one came from. So
I'm looking at.
So I don't know if that last paragraph even needs to be in there, because that's more of a reference to like a legal standard.
Yeah, it is.
Standard.
I just Googled the prudent man rule, and
Yeah,
it stems from a common law from 1830.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
But that's,
But there is, I mean, it's a definition in an investment sense, though.
I think that you could just say that investments.
It's a legal principle that's used to restrict the choices of a financial manager of an account to the types of investments that a person seeking reasonable income and preservation of capital might buy for his or own portfolio, her own portfolio. Prudent person rule might be applied to the manager of a pension fund or employee investment account, or to the guardian trustee of an estate. It's intended as a general guideline for someone managing assets of value for another person or people.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I think we could probably just make reference that the prudent man rule applies. And that's a kind of a common vernacular that everybody understands.
Sure.
Yeah.
We
And
know that
honestly,
prudent man-
I'm okay leaving the definition in there, just taking the quotes out of it since we don't know where the source is from.
Yeah, get the quotes out
When-
since we don't know. And take capital, and then we're not quoting them anyway. We changed the word. We plagiarized, but we didn't quote them because we changed the word capital to principal.
So, Liz,
Yes.
it also says in that second sentence, it says individuals acting in accordance with written procedures and this investment policy. Do we have written procedures?
We don't at this time. Once we have a policy in place, I can certainly draft written procedures to use internally if we need to. And that might be something that, you know, we look at doing once we've got the kind of standard. But the procedures are usually internal, kind of operational. How do I functionally do this? That would refer back to the governing policy.
Yeah, I see that. I just want somebody looking at that saying individuals acting in accordance with written procedures, and somebody says, well, where are the procedures?
Yeah, there probably will be some procedures once this gets revised. We typically have procedures for a lot of our processes in accounting, and
Okay.
just because if I'm one of these people that if something happened to me and somebody else had to jump in and fill in all the way, I want them to have, documentation of
Yeah, that's good. I just didn't want to have something in that policy that we couldn't back up or somebody questioned us on it. Like,
Yeah.
well, where are they? That's the only point.
Tom, what are your thoughts? You've been
Yeah, my thought is, it's hard for me to finalize my yes vote on the policy without something that looks like procedures. So I was saving that comment for the end of this discussion, but since it just came up, to me, that's just the next step in this whole, project.
It is, but in a sense, it's a next step that we take internally. I mean, to develop the procedures for how staff function or things like that. And honestly, with this one, there's not a whole lot of other staff involvement. So I don't know that there's a lot procedural there other than I might put things in place that, any communication, needs to be in writing or something like that with the investment broker. But
Well, yeah, kind of the two next steps to me were something that approaches procedures because of this. To me, the issue is exactly how are we going to invest the money? And the other thing that to me is kind of missing is the whole monitoring and reporting process. And those two, I was hoping that this group could actually get to.
okay.
Because those things to me are important.
Okay. And so what I would say is if it's something that you guys feel the board needs to have reporting or something like that that's stipulated, that should become part of this policy, right? Otherwise, a procedure document becomes an internal mode of operations of how do I run my department to keep up with this and follow this policy. So keeping in mind that this policy is that governance level. So as we go through this and we talk about reporting or something like that, maybe that should be part of this policy that says, just like it says, we have an audit every, that the audit services are bid every 3 to 5 years, and that it's reported to the board annually. Those things, in order to maintain consistency and to keep that at the right level, that it's the governance level that should be hearing those reports, that should be part of the policy.
Would we not want to expand upon section 8 to handle that
Yeah.
aspect of it?
I think there is
The
some
reporting-
space in here where we could add that in. Morris, what were you going to say over there?
Yeah, when I was looking at this, it's almost like we're rolling two policies in here. You know, there's a financial policy with all your documentation and procedures and who does what and all that kind of thing. We don't have another financial policy in place, do we? That
Oh, we have
says
lots
who
of
does-
financial policies in place.
Well, I mean, it seems like we're rolling a lot of, I mean, this is just an investment policy, not a financial policy. We're mixed, seem to me, I'm not,
Well,
I mean,
the
it's
investment policy is a piece of the overall financial policies
true.
of the
Do
association.
we have a financial policy?
We
That
have,
who does what with all the procedures and all that? Because I think that was a little bit what Tom was talking about. That, I don't want to roll too much stuff in an investment policy that shouldn't
So-
necessarily be in a financial policy.
so we don't have we don't have necessarily a financial policy. We have a series of policies that make up the financial operations from that governance level of, you know, how we do things, right? And so there are certain things that get called to that governance level through specific policies. Certain aspects of the investments obviously are part of it, but then those policies delegate or leave certain areas to staff to manage. And so through certain policies, I mean, the highest level of financial policy we have is that we follow GAAP, right? I mean, and that really is. So how that is done on a daily basis, on a procedural level, is delegated to me, and then reviewed. I mean, but it gets reviewed every year by the auditors and things like that to make sure we've got good, you know, practices and that we're following all of the policies and what we do. But we have a purchasing policy, and we have an investment policy, and we have a funds control policy. So we have different policies in our policy guide, kind of guide specific areas that the board has said, you know, these are the areas where we really do want to lay out these parameters.
Well, the question was much for my own knowledge and update is anything, but yeah, that financial policy, I would see with like the play script procedures. Liz does this, the responsibility is this, the action is this, and, you know, go through. If Liz gets hit by a car or something, someone can pull those procedures and says, you do this, like a play script procedure.
Yeah.
I didn't know if we had that in place, because to me, that's more of a financial policy. And I thought our focus is just in the investment side of it.
I would say this is twofold. It's one, to delegate the responsibility internally, right? Whether, you know, it's the treasurer or whether it's the CFO or whether, I mean, and obviously sometimes that person can be the same person, but it's not always. And so we need to keep that in mind. It could be different. But it should, I mean, the board is going to approve this policy or not approve it. I mean, we're making a recommendation to them, right? So this is the board setting a policy that is their expectation for how it's handled. So it should be then guidance to staff and to an investment broker or to somebody else on how to do that. I think it's got multiple purposes there. Tom?
I have nothing to add.
Well, you're shaking your head, so I feel like you're thinking something that you want to say.
Oh yeah, this is getting complex. Well, what I'm shaking my head at is, here we are in the first bullet on the first page of the first paragraph, and we've already spent over half an hour of our time.
Yeah.
I can hardly wait to get to, you know, maybe the second or third page.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're okay with the prudence paragraph, and we'll kind of recircle back to this. Maybe we can address some of the procedural concerns as we go through the policy, and if we don't feel like we've addressed them, we can have another conversation towards the end or even at the next meeting. How's that sound to kind of wrap up what we were on? We'll try to address it as we go through, and then we'll keep going. Okay. So any other thoughts on the prudent person standard? I basically left the standard in there, and then just because I think for the the board or for non-investment people, it's good to have the understanding of, or a mutual understanding of what we're talking about there. But I took the quotation marks off the definition. And then, so the ethics and conflict of interest statement. Any concerns there?
No,
No,
I'm good.
All right, so, and then we've got this other delegation of authority, which may be redundant.
well, I have a question because when we start with the bylaws in the section, it says a treasurer, and now we've got the chief financial treasurer.
And that's why we
We're
got
not
to,
consistent is what I'm concerned about.
when they're one and the same, it makes a lot of sense. If they're not, then you do have to separate it. And we had to kind of work through that in developing even the charter for this committee. The bylaw authority is granted to the treasurer. So probably down here, it needs to take the CFO part out and just have treasurer.
But how does that affect the CFO if they're doing all the investment and knowing what funds are available to invest and what the cash flow needs are and so on and so forth?
well, they have to work together.
Okay.
The treasurer could delegate certain things to the CFO, but that's part of the reason why your chief financial officer has often also held the role of treasurers, because the duties that are stated in the bylaws, there's more than just that one sentence. Just put that one sentence because it was the one that was applicable here, but they're also responsible for all of the deposits and everything else that happens on a daily basis. So
So then the last sentence where it just says CFO, we need to change and add the word treasurer.
yep, and I just did that real quick.
That's all I did.
Yeah, when I focus on that one sentence, it says no person may engage in an investment transaction except as provided in the terms of this policy. Is that too restrictive, or are there other things that say under either unforeseen circumstances, or even Liz takes a 6-week cruise around South America or something, that says you can't delegate it?
Yeah. Or maybe we say as provided under the terms of this policy or otherwise approved by the board, and maybe kick
something that allows plan B to occur.
And because it's the treasurer you're talking about here, yeah, you may want to say or as otherwise. Because if your treasurer was going to be gone for, even if somebody was out for surgery or something, you could have someone on for a little while, and the board could make a determination on who was to fill those duties in the meantime or something like that.
There has to be some kind of a safety valve or backup.
Okay, so may engage in, sorry, or otherwise approved by the
I'd like to run kind of this general thought by the group. And I kept on, when reading this, I kept on running into kind of the same set of issues over and over. It's the issue of roles and whether it's necessary to define roles. In terms of this investment policy and the investment process, essentially Liz is either the customer or ultimately she directs all investment activities. Do we kind of agree on that?
Well, I think at this time, yes, but as the reserves build, the the POA may want to assign somebody just to cover that, so we don't overburden Liz. So
Right.
that's why when you talk about a plan, a secondary plan, that's important. But I'm looking at maybe someday there might be a controller underneath the CFO that will be doing the cash management back and forth, because there's a lot on the CFO's plate now, let alone add all this additional stuff.
Okay.
So I think we should allow the ability of somebody to also be in charge of that, other than the treasurer CFO, to help make decisions or do it and then report, because we know ultimately that CFO is responsible.
Well, and typically what has been done in some of the other policies is that it states the responsible party, but then allows for delegation. Some of that, when certain things are granted to the CEO, there allows for an opportunity for her to delegate, to someone else in certain circumstances. So maybe that's what you look at doing somewhere in here, is because you always want to keep the ultimate responsibility with your highest level person, right? So whether my team is doing something or not, it's still my responsibility to make sure it gets done according to the rules and the policies, and regardless of which person on our staff team actually does it, it's still my authority or my responsibility. So I don't think you want to lose that by delegating over, because you want to keep that kind of hierarchy in place, but I do think you probably could create an opportunity to delegate.
If I may interrupt, but above that, we have no person may engage in an investment transaction except for provided. So we pretty well tied the hands to the treasurer CFO. You cannot delegate that down. I know we were making adjustments to that, but it's not well defined, because that sentence pretty well locks it down to you.
You want to take that sentence out?
Yeah.
We don't have to keep it in.
I'm just trying to make the thing flexible enough that it'll actually
Well,
work
I think
in an operational setting.
I think it makes it flexible when you add in the clause that, or wherever approved by the board. Because the board has the ultimate decision as to delegating of authority.
True.
Okay, so
Board.
I'm gonna give you a little scenario. Liz gets sick and is out of commission for a month. Are we gonna have to go to the board to get the board to approve somebody else within administration to manage the PO, the funds? Is that what you're saying?
Or if we
Yeah.
made a decision if we made a decision to hire a controller that was underneath me, I don't know that we would have to go back to the board for me to ask someone else to be transactional, not to have authority
No.
over it or responsibility over it, but to be transactional. And I think that's the problem with this sentence, is that it talks about transactions, not
Right.
authority or responsibility, but transactions. And
Correct.
that's the hang up.
What if we just take it out, Liz, like you suggested?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
where I am too.
Take it out, just take it out.
Got it. And then it then states the treasurer is responsible for all transactions taken and shall establish a system of control. So it still delegates that authority and allows that flexibility to establish a system or a process, or delegate the transaction level to someone else if needed, while maintaining the responsibility with the right place. Does that work, Tom?
Excuse me?
Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. Can
All
I
right.
continue with my little lecture?
Yep.
The next level down after the person directing investment responsibility, and I understand we're not really big enough, is typically in large corporations, there's somebody who's an expert. And in our case, theoretically, we could hire a consultant, but someone who really understands, what you're doing. And part of the problem is, as I read through the investment policy, there's lots of things in here that I simply don't understand. And we need, or at least I need, an expert so that I can say, what is this thing they could actually tell me? And we don't have that. And right now, I think maybe this committee is the quote expert. And I don't know how comfortable we are with a lot of the detailed stuff in this document. Just to kind of finish it off, the next level is when Liz says, go do this or go do that, typically for securities, you have a broker dealer who's usually kind of essentially licensed by the SEC. In our case, that's not quite the case, because I think right now we're just sort of loaded up on CDs and the rest of the money is just sitting in a checking account in the bank. And lastly, it's, and this document does talk a lot about, is custody. Oftentimes, with securities, you know, my money is actually held by either Vanguard or the bank or well, the TD Ameritrade. They're the actual custodians. We do talk about custodianship. We do somewhat mention the people actually procuring the investments. But the thing that I kept running into over and over was we really don't have an expert in this area or a consultant. And those are just thoughts, and I don't know that we need to put that in the investment policy. But again, I just kept on running into those issues over and over again. That's all.
Now, and maybe I can help a little bit. While we do just have everything in CDs right now, we actually do have a broker and a team of investment advisors through our bank that are more than willing
Okay.
to consult and advise and work out with us, not just on the investments, but on the policy. And so that's as there were some sections I'd highlighted, some different colors in here. Those were sections that as we get to them, we may decide, you know what, that's the stuff that we want to send to, you know, to this team, or maybe you know, we've got teams from different banks too, and we can send it different directions and say, you know, what are your thoughts here, and what's the equivalent in Arkansas, because this is you know, references something in Minnesota, and so that we may decide, you know, at the end of this meeting that there's some pieces that we do want to go talk to some experts about and make sure that, you know, while we do have expertise here on this committee, we may want some professional consultants too in developing this. So we do have that available to us if we choose to.
Okay. In that case, is it necessary to reference those groups and their qualifications in this document, or is that something more for what's essentially procedures?
I don't know. Let's figure that out as we get through them.
Okay.
Boy, Tom, for someone that wanted to move on, you've just taken 15 minutes for a lecture. Thank you.
That's the way I am. It's
put
really
in
a problem is when you ask me a question.
Sit down and raise your hand, man.
You may not want to hear the answer.
I understand what you're saying.
There's no need to go digging for gold in his house because we won't find any.
All right. So let's try to keep going through this a little bit and go through section 1, at least, investment objectives. And I will say, I think there's something missing here from the objectives, which might be the purpose of the funds. And this, you know, we talked last time about understanding our buckets. This refers to idle funds, but we might want to address reserve funds in here separately, as they are reserved by the board for future repairs and replacement in different categories.
I have to admit, I didn't understand the buckets. I know Wayne and Tom they had worked on it before, but I didn't that terminology of buckets. That I don't know what that's referring to, but maybe that's not the place for the discussion here, but you can enlighten me later. But I didn't know what that term buckets, your buckets.
I think what they're referring to, or what we're referring to, is just different, you know, we've got operating funds and we've got you know,
Yeah, capital funds.
funds, and we've got capital funds that are for, we have these reserve funds, which are for future repairs, you know, we're saving for the
Right.
future kind of thing. So just understanding what the different types of cash or cash-like funds we have and making sure that the policy addresses those if necessary. Did I capture
Okay.
that well, Wayne?
I just don't know if we need to have the word idle in there.
Okay.
That the HSB POA will invest funds based on the following objectives. I don't know that the word idle needs to be there.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Everybody else good? I have no
Yeah.
problem with it.
That's a good point. I agree.
Okay.
And then, you know, I have a little bit of a problem with the way we state interest rate risk, because I would think that the vehicles that we would be investing in, yeah, there's going to be market fluctuation there, but if held to maturity, we're not going to have a loss of principal.
Well, one of the risks when you talk about liquidity, and I think somewhere it says the portfolio should consist of securities with active secondary or resale market. Hopefully
does.
that's, you know, plan C or D, and you hope never to execute it. But if you have to sell your securities, then you are subject to interest rate risk. And 99.99% of the time, you do indeed hope
Right.
to hold your securities to maturity.
Well, and I think when you look to the, you know, the points A and B underneath that, where it defines the interest rate risk, we're minimizing the risk that we take. I mean, and I think that does guide your investment decisions. If
Right.
whether it's a CD or not, that you want to try to reduce the risk for that to happen in whatever
Mm-hmm.
investment tool you're selecting. And so I think that does have value here as a higher level principle. I mean, that's talking here is these objectives, what, you know, in selecting investments. I think that's important to have in there.
Yeah, I think it's good to be in there. And then when you look at the term, are we comfortable with doing a 10-year investment at this point in time? Now, I realize you don't want to go in here and change your investment policy very frequently at all, but given the village and where we are financially and where we're likely to be financially for several years to come anyway, I thought that maybe the maximum of 10 was a little high. That's just my feeling as one person, and that maybe our maximum term should be held at 5 years right now. Because we're in a really weird interest rate environment when you're talking almost 0%, and you're looking at Europe that actually has negative interest rate.
I'm comfortable with the 10 just because it gives you flexibility to make a determination over time on what the market rate, you know, would I do that right now? No, probably not, and haven't in my time here. But that's not to say that at some point in time, we might not take some of the reserve funds and say, you know, we're reserving these for something that we see, you know, not needing that cash for, and that there might be some that are extended a little bit longer in order to, you know, I don't know. What is everybody else's thoughts?
Very generally, I would probably tend to agree with Diana. I have a hard time envisioning almost any situation where we would invest the money for as long as 10 years. But at the same time, I certainly understand you want this thing to provide you with flexibility. I mean, it is quite possible that we can envision a project that we will start to execute in, say, 7 years, in which case it is entirely appropriate to invest money with a maturity of 7 years to match that. I mean, the general underlying principle is you should invest your funds to match your expected liabilities. But at the same time, yeah, 10, from a practical standpoint, 10 is very long. And, given this current situation, which I don't think the policy is really intended to specifically address, anything longer than 5 just seems pretty darn long. But once again, from just a maintaining flexibility standpoint, 10 is probably absolutely as far as you want to go out.
I don't know, it just seems subjective to me. Tom says 6, I say 7, Diane says 10. I say leave it as 10. You're going to apply the prudent man rule anyway. I mean, you're not going to go out there and invest something for 10 years right now anyway.
Wayne, what were your thoughts?
Well, I like flexibility, but I wouldn't be against 5 years. In this deal, they can always come back to the board and ask to extend it on a special circumstance. So we do have some flexibility if the investment term needs to be longer than 5 years. But I want to kind of go back to credit risk, and then where we minimize the credit risk, which is the risk of loss due to failure of security, issuer, or backer. And we do need to put in there some wordage that refers to the financial institutional custodian that's holding our funds. Because if you're at a bank, you do know that it's only 250,000 FDIC. If you're a brokerage, it's only 500,000 at SPIC, and some brokerages have insurance. But if we look at Bear Stearns, that not only did bonds but did some trading, when they went defunct, anybody that had more than $500,000 in lost their investment.
Right.
So I think we need to make sure that we're dealing with stock brokerage houses that have enough power to ensure that some safety, that they're not going to go under because some rogue broker made a bad trade, and that's happened.
Okay.
Excellent point.
Risk to failure security issuer, backer or financial institution.
Yes, it's the custodian of our account or our holdings. So at a banking institute, if you stay under 250,000, which is the FDIC insured, you're okay. But once you exceed that, then you got to look at the credit risk of that bank being able to maintain business or not. But it's more about small brokerages that handle trades. I mean, they're not so small, but there is an equity factor. And somebody that sells short or does derivatives can adversely hurt the solvency of a brokerage house. And the brokerage house owns, if you're a mutual fund, they own those mutual funds.
Right.
And stocks and bonds and so on.
So if we just say,
So do you want to the failure of the custodian?
yeah, that's the word I chose. I kind of scrolled down through the rest of the document to see what language it referred to later to make sure it was consistent. And so it says failure of the security issuer, backer, or custodian. And that covers that. Great catch, Wayne. Okay, so if we switch back to the term, I'm hearing that you guys are more comfortable with 5, which is fine. And the more I'm listening to y'all and thinking about it, I don't think we want to be back to a place where everybody just bought 10-year CDs because that was the max on the policy, and that's all we had was 10-year CDs. So I kind of like
depends the rate of return.
years, but what if we put in the maximum of 5 years unless otherwise approved by the board, which would allow for an opportunity if a special circumstance arose for them to go to the board and get approval for a different term?
I like that, Liz. Otherwise, somebody's going to say, well, why only 5 years? So that question will come up as soon as someone sees what the maximum 5 years, they're going to say, who picked the 5 years, you know? So I think it's good if you can put a little qualifier with it. 5 years is fine with, you know, exception approved by the board or whatever.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good plan.
Okay.
Right now, are we kind of stuck on B term?
We're done with B now.
No, we're not.
Okay, yes, that's where we're,
Here we go.
Well, no, hopefully this one is fairly simple. The first sentence, investments will be scheduled to cover all expenditures. I thought that was kind of vague. Now, if you go down to C, the second sentence says, this is accomplished by structuring the portfolio so that securities mature concurrent with cash needs to meet anticipated demands. That's a lot less vague. And I guess in my mind, more or less, that's what the first sentence in B kind of sort of should say.
Why do we?
We're trying to
need have that
structure our investments to match the liabilities or potential liabilities.
well,
Okay, go ahead, Liz.
well, I think the reason I like it there and to say that you've got to cover all expenditures, I mean, it does go into better detail in the liquidity section, absolutely. But
Right.
if we were to change our operating account to a sweep account that was investing the sweep, you would have to set it up with the parameters that it would allow you to cover all your expenditures. And so I kind of like that as a term piece on there as well.
Right, but then again, we're going back to this bucket concept. That particular bucket is invested or is intended to be invested to meet anticipated demands. So you're tying, well, I think either sentence ties it, but I just thought this C does state it better than B. I just felt that cover all expenditures was too vague. But at the end of the day, when you read the investment policy as a whole, you know, yeah, I am comfortable. But if we feel that the first sentence of B is, you know, okay, then I think we can then move on and say we are finished with B.
What if the word instead of all was expected? Investments will be scheduled to cover expected expenditures.
Well, maybe, I don't know. This is specifically from the job that I came from. We use the term match, but.
So if we took that sentence out and just let the term pieces sit as they were with the 1 year and the 5 years, and then let the liquidity statement speak for itself, does that?
Yeah, I
fit?
think that
I
probably,
think
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a better solution.
I'm good with that.
Wayne Morris, you good with that?
Yes, I'm good with it.
Fine.
Okay. All right. So we just took that sentence out of the terms and then let the liquidity statement start to speak for itself. So now we're to number C, the liquidity. Any questions, concerns, comments on that, or do we like that statement as it is?
I like it.
It's good.
Where it says, furthermore, all possible cash demands cannot be anticipated. The portfolio should consist of securities with active secondary resale markets. My understanding is that right now, our the bulk of our investments are CDs, which don't have active secondary resale markets. I think in the ideal world, your CDs would have some kind of a surrender feature or early cash out feature.
I think they do, and we have had to, we had to do that a number of years ago.
So could we maybe put a comma or resale markets, comma, or surrender features? Because CDs don't.
Yep.
Well,
Well, if you buy your CDs through a broker, which they sell bank CDs, you've got an active secondary market.
Okay, I didn't know that.
if I may, yes, a lot of brokerage houses sell CDs, and when you want to sell them, you take a pretty deep hit because they have to discount them, and then they'll sell them on the secondary market in that. And then at banks, normally most banks charge a 3-month interest penalty, so you lose the prior 3 months of interest. So, you know, it's a little different at a bank, but their CDs are liquid to some degree.
So with that understanding, and I will say, I mean, our CDs now are through a brokerage, so they are, they do have that secondary market if we had to reach that point.
But you'll lose
And
20%.
you might even sell them at a premium.
Well, you
depending on
could,
what you're,
but unlikely, Diane.
Yeah.
well, you know, we're in a 0 interest rate environment right now. And if I happen to have a old 3 or 4% CD that hasn't matured yet, I might be able to sell it at a premium. I think that the language is fine the way it's written.
Okay.
Liz, we mentioned later on that we will not purchase any derivatives. Should that statement go here as well?
No, that's more of a specific debt, I mean, a specific instrument than a liquidity thing, I believe. And I mean, does anybody agree?
Well, we have it in another section. I don't know. It seemed like it.
Yeah, I think it's down there in a section that defines what it cannot.
Yeah, there is, because and we underlined it before on, you know, that we're not going to purchase derivatives. So I didn't know.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think,
it does. Maybe it doesn't fit there, but we really want to try to make a point on that.
yes,
I'm okay to move on.
Diana.
There's a sentence down in the yield, the last sentence for yield. Does it really belong in yield, or should it be in liquidity when we state that security shall generally be held until maturity? I'm a little conflicted there as to where the right place for that sentence should be.
I think it's okay there because in the liquidity section, it says the liquidity is accomplished by structuring the portfolio so that securities mature concurrent with cash needs to meet anticipated demands. So
Okay,
it said in the liquidity section, just in a little bit different manner.
okay.
Feel okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. All right. So if we look at yield,
I'm for taking out the benchmark.
okay,
portion.
just take it out altogether versus,
That's what I think.
okay. Well, and keep in mind, this policy was a municipality with, you know, the original. So some of the stuff we're taking out, I mean, one, it's in another state, and some of it is a different type of organization. Maybe there are very clear standards for municipalities that we don't have, so if we take that out, then it just starts to talk about, you know, kind of what we discussed earlier, that the return on investment is secondary importance.
Actually, on my copy, Liz, you had that marked out. I can't tell what color, but it was marked out.
It was highlighted to say, we need to do something with this or find an equivalent because it referenced a Minnesota standard.
Yeah, right. And I thought you had removed it or blocked it out, which was
No,
fine. I think it's okay.
I said, it doesn't fit the way it's worded. We got to do something with it.
Oh, okay.
All right, so with that
I
sentence,
agree with Wayne. Take it out.
anybody have anything else with the yield section?
Yeah, how does this committee feel about benchmark at all? I mean, should we have a benchmark? Does the board like or want us to have some kind of a performance standard, and or do we think that the ownership in general would find value in having some kind of a performance target?
And the problem there is your investment policy will take you through many, many cycles of market conditions. So it's very difficult to come up with a useful benchmark to use there. You're coming back to the standard, which is the prudent man standard of what they would do in the current economic conditions.
Well, actually, I was going to add a section 11 there, sort of in line with Tom. We could at least say we have an investment expectation or just a goal. This is our expectation or this is our goal. And it might be as simple as not to lose money. I mean, we could put some kind of simple type of goal, but if we don't have some kind of goal, I wouldn't call it a benchmark, but at least a section there that says what the expectation or the goal for this policy is. I mean, it could be pretty thin, but to have something.
Well, I think it would be more appropriate if you want benchmarks to put it in the procedures that the CFO and management designs, what they're going to utilize to show the board how they're investing, rather than in an investment policy of locking it into some benchmark that might be good today, but 4 years from now be out of sync with the rest of the nation, or the market, I should say.
Yeah, I'm not sure it has to be as formal as a benchmark.
Because Morningstar is sometimes considered the jewel crown, but there are things that Morningstar does that a lot of brokerage houses don't agree with either.
Sure.
You know, or do you use Value Line in their picks? You know, so there's so many different places you can go, or the Morgan Stanley index. So I think that would be more appropriate in a procedure manual than it would be in an investment policy. Now, we could say that management's to establish a benchmark of some type within their policy, but not, I just don't think we should pick a particular benchmark company or category and lock it in.
I would agree with that. I mean, not a strict benchmark, because like you said, you can find a half a different benchmarks from different companies. But it seemed like and maybe it should be more in a board policy or something like that. But it just seemed like if we didn't have any kind of a goal or expectation, and like I said, if it was just as simple as our goal is to maintain safety of funds. I mean,
I'm just
why don't we
searching a little bit here as far as what these benchmark things are, and what that benchmark index is really trying to do is provide, it says perspective and a relevant yardstick to measure mutual fund returns. And so by picking a fund or a group of funds that you benchmark against, which is what they've done in this draft, you know, in this policy, in this organization, is to say that it's actually saying that the performance expectation and the investment expectation falls within the lines of this type of fund. And so I don't know that we want to go that far but it would, but locks you into a specific strategy as far as investment goes on a fund makeup or something like that with mutual funds, which I don't know is necessarily what we're looking at doing here, is it?
Well, remember, your money market is a mutual fund.
It is, yes.
So I wouldn't be against saying that management's policy and procedure should have a benchmark established for the investments, but I don't think we should lock it down to one particular type of benchmark like it is in this.
Yeah.
But I like flexibility, and that really should be up to the CFO, treasurer, to make sure they're doing their due diligence and fiduciary responsibility of managing the funds properly.
So maybe it's in the reporting section where you talk about, what comes back to the board on a report is that it compare, any report back to the board should compare performance with some sort of benchmark.
We could do that.
I mean, I guess from where I sit, and we just simply haven't gotten there that far. But if we just had a periodic report that says over this period, our return was X%, as long as it's being reported and the X% is positive. Personally, I'm happy, I'm thrilled, because right now we don't have anything. So if we ever get to the point where we have periodic reporting, and part of the periodic report is what is our earnings, then that's a big step from where we are today. And whether it's benchmarked or not, I don't think it's totally necessary.
So I'll go back to what I originally said. I think we should just take that whole sentence, that whole terminology out of this yield section.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with
So
that.
where it
Actually,
starts with the word "the benchmark to be used," that whole sentence goes
Correct.
away.
So yeah, now it says taking into account the investment risk, constraints, and liquidity needs. Return on investment is of secondary importance compared to safety and liquidity objectives.
good.
Then I guess we run into another issue, which is the first sentence is the investment portfolio shall be designed with the objective of attaining a market rate of return, I guess through budgetary and economic cycles. That sentence is almost meaningless. Or it sounds good.
Well, I think it guides to say we want to try to attain the best market return we can while we, take into all these other considerations and.
Right.
It's,
But I think just listening to this conversation, we're just trying to get a reasonable rate of return.
Right.
Just plain English. Mm-hmm. But we can keep that wording, but I'm just, saying it doesn't mean anything to me at this point. But it does sound good.
well, and I do like the fact that it references a market rate of return, which still lends itself to some sort of
Benchmarking.
Well, yes, but that you could add that in later, but maybe in such a specific fashion as that sentence that we removed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else have anything on yield, or are we okay with it the way it is? All right. Hearing no further objections.
We can move on.
Move on to pooling of funds, which I highlighted in yellow because I'm not sure that applies to us. I mean, specifically, if you look at having operating accounts and reserve accounts and all of these things, pooling them is kind of the opposite of maintaining their like separate purposes to some extent, unless somebody else understood this differently than I did.
Well, I was kind of looking at it from the standpoint of you might be at a threshold. Maybe you're looking for, maybe you've got 99,000 in an account in one of our reserve accounts or something, and you could take $1,000 from someplace else and put it in there and be able to get a $100,000 investment. Okay, that's pooling the monies. And as long as you kept track of that in a subset of accounting trail so that you had the trail for it, that $100,000 CD, that 1,000 of that principal and the earnings thereon belong to the golf surcharge account, for example. That's how I was looking at that. And maybe that's not right, but that's what I was seeing when I read it.
Maybe the problem with this sentence is that it says we will and not that we can. Because the way I'm reading,
Yeah, that's
I basically, if I'm reading this says I have to.
maybe it should say may instead of will.
Yeah.
Maintaining proper accounting records to provide an audit trail.
Correct. But that's an internal accounting tracking system.
Yeah.
My question to you, Liz, is what funds do we have that we cannot pool by law, by statute of law, not by policy, but by law? Because, you know, tracking all those accounts is done in your office and they all have separate accounts, but that doesn't mean necessarily that we can't pool all that money together to grasp a good return on that money, and then allocate that return money on a percentage basis back to each one of those reserved accounts.
I will say, I don't think we necessarily have anything restricted by law or by statutes. I think that comes from this being a governmental entity, you know, that we got this policy from. We do have funds, though, that are restricted beyond the board, right? So we have some grant funds from the fire department that are restricted, and we have funds from the bond that are restricted as part of that bond fund. So there are funds have in some form of fashion that even the board can't say, okay, go move this differently, right? Because there is some higher restriction. If you were dealing in a nonprofit, like a totally nonprofit world, it would be a donor restriction, right? The board can't release a donor restriction, only the donor can.
Because, you know, I'm not a CPA, but as long as those are kept on the books as requirements of what our cash needs are, it doesn't mean that you can't take money from a bond and put it in an interest-bearing account. And if it's pooled, it's one account, but that particular restricted account owns a percentage of that pooled money.
No, those bond funds are actually maintained by a trustee. I can't touch them. And they are invested by that trustee. So,
So they are, yeah, okay. But they are invested.
They are invested.
So
That's
in
outside
effect,
of our control. Yeah, Diana.
in effect, they are kind of protected by statute. There are rules and regulations, not necessarily a statute, but I mean,
And
to
so
protect them.
maybe we say, except for those not legally restricted by statutes, but those restricted by
Classification.
So we may have some restrictions on health insurance because we're self-insured on the health insurance too. So I'm trying to think, and workers' comp. So I'm kind of trying to think through all of our, and so maybe it just for those otherwise restricted, which allows us some leniency in, you know,
Yeah.
where we've got restrictions and where we don't.
So just for my ignorance, so we're self-insured, I know that, or that, but when we write a check to the insurance people to pay our fees, does that not come out of the general ledger and out of the general checking account, or you have a separate checking account?
It comes out of the general ledger, but it is maintained in a separate account.
Right.
Yeah.
But the money is pulled into the general checking account and then paid.
No. Yeah, we have a separate checking account for workers' comp. We have a separate checking account for the health insurance, things like that.
I mean, a separate actual checking account at a bank, or within the accounting department?
An actual separate account at the bank.
Oh, okay.
We are required to keep, we have one for health, one for dental, one for work comp. We have actual different bank accounts for those things. And some of that comes back to the requirements of the company. So that's why I'm trying to say, maybe except for those otherwise restricted, sometimes maybe something's held as collateral too, and we've got a restriction there. So I can think of some different scenarios there where we would have some restrictions that might prevent pooling. So does that work okay if unless we say, you know, that we may consolidate pool cash or reserve fund balances from all funds except for those otherwise restricted?
Fine with me.
Okay.
I'm good.
Good.
Okay. I'm hitting save again before I lose this. Okay. Section 3, authorized investments. Here we go. The very first sentence, of course, I've got highlighted because it references a Minnesota statute. And we could say invest in securities authorized below and just kind of leave it to what we, you know.
I would just take it, I would just take that out and just say the HSVPOA will invest only in securities as follows. And I would make the number one thing, what over here is number 4, the certificates of deposit would be number 1.
But you know, T-bills, bonds, and notes you can buy T-bills, you know, on a short-term base. So,
That's true.
and
That's
government
true. That's really true.
government bonds are more secure and
That's
guaranteed
true.
in a-
So that would, okay. Well, I just think we need to move CDs up a little bit higher than in,
Well, and honestly,
rather than.
this is a list of options, not a prioritized list. So
That's true. That's true.
order didn't make much of a difference as long as the description
Mhm.
we can and can't do are clear, is really more important to me than the order.
That's true. Are we really going to invest in high-risk mortgage-backed securities?
I hope not.
We can take that out. That's why we're talking through some of this stuff, that just because that was in this,
Yeah,
draft, we're okay with it.
that in there.
Okay. So governmental bonds, notes, bills. We want to take mortgages out.
I would like to take them out.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the problem is that there may have been certain um, mortgage-backed securities that actually fit in the definition of government bonds. But no, you don't want to invest in them.
Okay.
But this is where you need an expert to tell you whether what I just said is true or not.
Well, and what I will probably do, I mean, with your blessing, of course, but I will probably send this to a couple of investment folks before we finish and say, you know, did we mess something up here? Did we limit ourselves too far? Or did we leave this too open? You know, kind of get some differing opinions on that. Okay, I take out that word mortgages, so it just says bonds, notes, bills, and other securities which are direct obligations, guaranteed, and then we can take out excluding mortgage-backed securities defined as high risk.
I think if you'll back up, you should take out that are directly guaranteed or issued by the United States, and take out the obligation, because that's Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Farm Home Administration. Those are obligations. The only one that's guaranteed in mortgages is a Ginnie Mae.
But governmental bonds, notes, bills, and other securities may be direct obligations, right?
No, T-bills and that, they're all guaranteed. Obligation is a quasar facility that's sought by the government, but is run independently.
Okay.
Like Freddie Mac, but when they got into financial trouble, the government came in and loaned them money so that they would be solvent.
Right. So if I just take out our direct obligations, or then we're back to the correct sentence.
Yes.
Governmental notes, bills, and other securities which are guaranteed or insured issues of the United States, its agencies, its instrumentalities, or organizations created by an act of Congress.
That works for me.
Or in certificates of deposit secured by letters of credit issued by federal home loan banks. No, we don't need that. Correct? That can come out.
Yeah, I think so.
And then we can take out a section of high-risk mortgage-backed securities. Okay. Number 2 then is obligations of the United States or its agencies under a repurchase agreement if the margin agreement under the repurchase agreement is 101% and with any one of the following institutions. Pulling out our existing policy real quick here to look and see what it says. Yep. Anybody have any thoughts on this one?
Well, on item D, we don't want to have that in there. Not the way it's stated anyway, because we don't want, do we care where its principal executive office is?
Oh, on that,
And Wayne, do we
Right.
make any mention of FINRA?
Well, I agree. We shouldn't lock down to where the corporate office is.
okay.
I'm just not sure 400 or $40 million combined capital is enough in today's world.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something you can ask a broker.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that is clarification from a broker.
okay. I'm gonna start highlighting broker questions in here. And I honestly, probably this whole section will be the real part that we want to get that input on. And
I just want to tell you that I worked for a broker dealer, and our trading platform was based in Appleton, Minnesota, and they went belly up because of a bad trade, made them insolvent. And you got to be careful, because if there isn't enough money to back them up, then the security exchange comes in and takes them over, similar to a bank, but there's no assurance that you're going to get more than that 500,000 guaranteed by the SPIC.
right.
Kind of the same with a bank. You know, when a bank goes insolvent, the FDIC shows up at 5 o'clock at night and goes in and takes control of the bank, and then it's open the next day with another banking institute. It's all done very quietly.
All right.
And we got the same issues here with the state and local obligations, because we don't want to say state of Minnesota, and we don't want anything with I don't think we want to be investing in any housing financing bonds, do we?
No, but I would say what we probably, before we delete a lot of this, I probably want to run that through and see requirements of our bonds are, because those are through the county government, that we get those wastewater bonds. And so we need to make
Right.
whatever we're putting in here doesn't suddenly contradict that.
I just don't think we need any of the references to Minnesota, that's for sure.
No, obviously.
In point A there under 3, municipalities, you don't want that in either, do you? You took out state of Minnesota, and this says, or any of its municipalities.
Right.
Well, I don't know if we just want to take out that, or if we want to replace that to say the state of Arkansas.
Well, my question is that maybe
You may want to buy some municipal bonds, you know, from a
Right.
school district
Right.
or county or state, and that because of the return and the tax benefits, because we are a nonprofit.
Well, we don't need the tax benefits.
Yeah.
We got so many years of laws carry forward, we'll never pay taxes.
Don't say things like that. You know, we gotta think positive. We're gonna be rolling in cash.
Okay, well, when we get to that, we can go look for some muni bonds then.
yeah, I could, the first two maybe are A and B. I can see, you know, changing to Arkansas and leaving those in. This third one, number C, I'm not sure about. And that's the one that references the housing agency.
Yeah, CD.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want to take on obligations of the federal government. We certainly don't want to take on any obligations of a state government.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so
One-
we don't want to buy any bonds from Illinois.
Well, and I will tell you, one of the things that we've had some investment brokers call in the past is where we listed certain things like in our existing policy, like state and federal government, but we didn't go into enough detail, like Wayne was talking about, to say, does that include the Freddie Macs and all those other people or not? So where it wasn't clear enough. So before we completely eliminate some of these, we may want to move them to a list of exclusions versus wiping out altogether. I'm kind of trying to be mindful of that a little bit, because we may want to say specifically that it doesn't,
Good point.
versus just deleting them from the sentence. So and we may have to work on some language on that, but I'm just kind of making some notes of that right now. So if we look at C and D, very possibly are gone or become an exclusion. And then E might be reworded or restated depending on, I don't see any, I mean, revenue obligation of any agency authority of the state of Arkansas other than those found in C or D above, which if those get excluded, then it might be reworded, but. Okay.
I have a question about the ratings.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that the rating system is pretty much what I'm used to, which is, you know, AAA, AA, single A, triple Bs. I was generally under the impression, at least at the state level, that actually single A is actually kind of a low rating, as opposed to, I'm used to, in the world of corporate, you know, single A is actually a pretty good rating. And like nobody is rated AAA, whereas at the state level, there's probably lots of AAA issuers because they have taxing power. So I was wondering if single A was maybe a little on the low side of,
Where do you see single? Oh, okay.
yeah, rated
Yeah,
single A or better by
well-
National Bond Rating Service.
Well, that's what we're thinking about scrapping C and D though, Tom, or that they would become an exclusion because we didn't like those two.
I know, but it's in B.
It's A and B. A and B both also have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good call, good catch. A is getting can be getting a little dicey.
And
Yeah,
so,
if you had a distribution of ratings between AAA, you know, AA, single A, I don't know what you'd end up looking like.
I believe,
I think like Illinois is rated triple B, and they're the worst of the worst.
and that's still investment grade, triple B.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mm. I mean, I think if we were yield chasers, and I don't think we are, a single A is probably fine. But I don't know if this is where you might
think-
mix things up. I don't know.
So-
I'm not really.
So are you saying we
about
should
it.
go with double A?
It's probably a question for the consultants or the,
and I'm wondering if it's because it's a state and local, if that's why
right,
it's that low. And so that's why I'm going to kind of check into that a little.
right. Once you get into local, I have no idea.
Also, municipal bonds come guaranteed and unguaranteed. So, you know, you can specify that the bonds have to have a guarantee, which is by a third party. And then there's obligation and general fund bonds. Obligated being like the sewer district did the modification, so the money from the sewer rates is set aside to repay the bond. Or if it's general obligation, it just comes out of the general fund.
Okay. I just kind of made some notes on this section in addition to the possible exclusions. Is this rating adequate or too low? Is it because it's local? Should it be a AA? What about guarantees on bonds through the third party and the obligated versus general funds? And how do we need to address that? And I will probably reach out to our bond counsel on that to make sure that we've covered ourselves adequately in that regard. Okay. Number 4. CDs at state and federally chartered banks, savings and loan associations, all investments made under the subsection limited to the amount of FDIC. Or the manner set forth in
What about
this.
credit unions?
What, Diana?
What about credit unions? CDs at credit unions.
Aren't they lumped under savings and loans?
Yeah, I think they are.
Are they? Are they? That's what I don't know.
Okay. I will.
I think they're all FDIC insured now. They used to have the Savings and Loan Insurance Corp, but I think that's been wrapped
No,
in.
I agree with that. I don't know if they're considered part of savings and loans, or if the credit unions are a separate, distinct, separate entity. I don't know.
Okay, I put a note on that to go research, and then also I'm going to put one under the where it says Minnesota, references that Minnesota statute. I think we need to find out if there is a Arkansas statute.
Arkansas.
Again, this is a municipality, so there may not be for private entities. That, I mean, this policy came from a municipality, the draft did, so. Okay. Any other questions, comments on this number 4?
I have a practical today question. You had mentioned that essentially the 1.54 million is all in CDs.
Mhm.
Are each and every one of those CDs under the $250,000 limit?
The
Okay.
highest one is 248,000.
Okay.
So it's a series of CDs ranging, I think, from 99,000 to 248.
And they're all with different banks, essentially.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're through the same brokerage firm, but yes, they're
Right.
diverse as far as who they're with.
The FDIC insurance coverage.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, the last one I renewed was, I picked this really great rate, and then he went to renew it and went, oh, we've already got one with that company. Can't do that one, can't get you that rate, sorry.
Yep. Okay.
I went, darn. All right, number 5. Any concerns with this? I mean, this is where we start to talk about the quality of and I think Moody's and Standard & Poor's are both reputable rating references there. Any issue with 5? I don't know. I'll check. I'm not sure if we need the Canadian subsidiaries piece here. This policy was from Minnesota, so they may have more
Yeah.
I had that circled also, Liz.
close connection there. So I'll just kind of check that. We may delete it. Okay. Number 6. I made that same note about the Canadian subsidiaries. I don't know if there's anything else on there.
Are we sure we want to invest in commercial paper of United States corporations? We want to invest in corporate bonds?
Diane, I'm sure that some of the mutual money markets are investing short-term.
I'm sure they are. You're right. You're right. You're right.
Whether we want to do it
We
as an
don't include-
individual, I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, but then you go down and look at 7 in the money market funds. They're limiting the money market funds.
Yeah, I see that. So basically, you're gonna be limited to treasury bills, notes. Liz, why don't you ask the broker exactly, if we look at money market, what's generally in that?
Okay.
What's her investment? So it might be a combination of corporate bonds and treasury bills and notes and short-term paper and.
So that's almost 6 and 7 both, looking at those.
Yeah.
Are we too limited? Are we too broad? And can we do what we want with these requirements or not? Okay. Got those notes in. And I don't think the next 3, 8, 9, and 10 are all limitations. And like I said, I think we may end up adding some limitations based on stuff we wanted to delete from up above to better clarify some of that. So we'll kind of work through that. Does anybody have any problems with these limitations though?
Not with the limitations, but on number 10, I'd like to be able to maybe put in there that we should not be buying general equities at this point, stocks.
Okay. Okay. I am mindful of the fact that it is 10:58 and we've been here almost 2 hours, which was kind of our time here. And we still have significant conversation to have on this as far as the safekeeping and custody with the banks and our I mean, there's just a lot left to this, and I know we particularly want to have some good conversation about the reporting and review. So how does everyone feel about leading towards adjournment, scheduling another meeting? It doesn't have to be a month from now. We can schedule more sooner than that if we want to, and picking this up and going through the rest. I will work on getting answers to some of these other questions as quickly as I can. But I want to give us sufficient time to kind of work through the rest of this and make sure we're good. How does that sound to you guys?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn with the ability to call another meeting between now and the first meeting in May.
Okay.
I second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Looks like everybody is in agreement there. So, do we want to look at calendars real quick and go on and try to set a date and time and another Zoom meeting to to work on this? I mean, if we stick with our Tuesday mornings, we got the 21st and 28th, either one.
I would go for the 28th, because then that would give you a chance to get some answers back from our broker on
Okay.
these other things.
I'm
I'm
in
good with
agreement
that.
with that.
I'm okay with it.
All right, so we are looking at Tuesday, the 28th at 9 a.m. And at this point in time, we will plan on that being a Zoom meeting. I do not anticipate that we will be all wanting to sit in a room together yet. As much as I like you guys, we're going to stay safe.
We're more concerned about you. You have children.
Yeah.
Yes, they're doing school from home. Great.
That's a joy.
All right, so
Haven't been expelled yet.
not yet.
Is anybody paying attention yet?
All right, so I'm going back to our agenda here real quick to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we have a new next meeting scheduled for the 28th, and then we will still continue our Tuesday, May 5th meeting. We'll leave that on the books as well, to kind of circle back to this. Do we have any closing comments, thoughts, anything from anybody on the committee? I want to say thank you guys. I know this is tedious working through this stuff, but this is the sausage making that makes all of this work, and I certainly appreciate your time and effort and attention to detail in working through this stuff. So thank you. All right.
Thank you.
That being said, I will
Thank you, Liz.
now adjourned at 11:02 p.m. Morris has got his mask back on to go back out and protect us all. And we'll talk to you guys in a couple weeks.
Okay. Thank you, Liz.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.